When European settlers first stepped onto North America, they believed they were looking at a vast wilderness, an untouched continent, a world of endless forests stretching beyond the horizon. That is the story most of us learn. But what if the land they saw wasn't untouched at all? What if they were walking through the aftermath of one of the greatest disasters in human history? For centuries, the history of the Americas was told in a very specific way. Small tribes, scattered settlements, a continent largely dominated by nature. But over the last few decades, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that doesn't fit that picture. In the year 1200, one of the largest cities in North America stood near the Mississippi River in what is now Illinois. Its name was Cahokia. At its peak, tens of thousands of people lived there. It contained enormous public plazas and towering earthen monuments. And Cahokia was not an isolated case. The deeper researchers looked, the more signs they found that large, complex societies once existed across the Americas. Then came another surprise. For generations, the Amazon rainforest was viewed as a place too difficult to support large populations. Dense jungle, poor soil, limited agriculture. But beneath the forest floor, researchers began finding evidence of something unexpected. Artificially enriched soils, ancient settlements, networks of roads and earthworks stretching across regions once thought to be untouched. Some scientists now believe parts of the Amazon were carefully managed landscapes capable of supporting far larger populations than previously imagined. Which raises an obvious question. If so many people once lived across the Americas, where did they go? Some population estimates suggest the Americas may have contained tens of millions of people before European contact, possibly even numbers comparable to Europe itself. There were cities, trade networks, governments, powerful states, and empires. Yet when Europeans began establishing permanent settlements, much of the land appeared strangely empty. Why? One clue comes from an expedition led by Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto in 1539. As his group traveled through the American Southeast, they described densely populated regions, large towns, extensive farmland, powerful chiefdoms capable of fielding armies. But when later European explorers passed through many of the same areas generations afterward, they encountered something very different. The settlements had vanished. The fields were gone. Forests covered the landscape. For years, historians struggled to explain the discrepancy. Had the early accounts been exaggerated? Had entire societies somehow disappeared? The evidence pointed toward a darker possibility. Something had swept across the continent before Europeans fully understood what was happening, and it traveled faster than any army. Long before many communities ever saw a European face, reports began appearing of sudden population collapse. Entire villages abandoned, leadership structures breaking down, trade networks failing. What made the mystery even stranger was that some of these disasters appeared in places Europeans had not yet reached. How was that possible? The answer may have been carried along the very trade routes that once connected these societies. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, they also brought diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza. Populations in the Americas had been separated from Afro-Eurasia for thousands of years. As a result, many communities had little biological resistance to these newly introduced diseases. The consequences were catastrophic. Researchers estimate that in some regions, population losses may have reached extraordinary levels. Entire communities disappeared. Languages vanished. Knowledge passed down for generations was suddenly lost. Some estimates suggest that tens of millions of people died across the Americas during the centuries following contact. The scale was so enormous that some researchers have even argued that the resulting reforestation may have contributed to measurable changes in the global climate. Suddenly, the mystery of the empty continent began to make more sense. When English settlers arrived in places like New England, they often found open fields ready for cultivation, forests that seemed unusually easy to move through, landscapes they interpreted as natural wilderness. But some historians now argue that parts of these environments may have been shaped by generations of human activity before being reclaimed by nature. In other words, many Europeans may have mistaken absence for emptiness. They saw forests, But they did not see the people who had once managed them. They saw wilderness, but they did not see what had been lost. And that leaves us with one final question. How much of this history still remains hidden beneath forests, fields, and modern cities? How many stories disappeared before anyone had the chance to record them? The Americas were not an empty world waiting to be discovered. They were a world already transformed by a catastrophe that few people understood at the time. And even today, we may still be uncovering what was left behind.